A prequel is a story that never needed to be told, because if it did, the original story would have started there. This is a simple principle that hamstrings nearly every prequel that's ever been made, cursing them, with very few exceptions, to always fall short of the original. That's not to say that it's a story nobody asked for, because for any intellectual property that garners a following, there's going to be a portion of the fanbase that will clamor for exactly this. Which brings us to a prequel's capital sin: self-indulgence. Self-indulgence of the creators, dwelling in the minutiae of how their own stories came to be, instead of telling new and better tales. Self-indulgence of the publishers, squeezing a franchise for all it's worth instead of letting it grow organically. And our own self-indulgence, partaking in the entertainment version of comfort food, a familiar meal with known thrills and a fully predictable outcome. None of these things are necessarily bad things in moderation. I'll be critiquing Before the Storm Episode 1 on its own merits in a little while, but first I would like to provide some context, because this is a very peculiar instance of a prequel. It was developed by an entirely different studio than Life is Strange Season 1. It stars entirely different voice talent for the same cast of characters. And it's a spawn of an intellectual property that belongs to the publisher, not to its original creators. All three of these things sound terrible and damning, but there is in fact a reasonable explanation behind it all. The last part is simple. Don't Nod, the guys that came up with the entire idea, sold their IP to Square Enix in order to develop Life is Strange Season 1. I'll be referring to Life is Strange as Liz from now on, because saying Life is Strange a bunch of times in the same sentence is bound to drive us all crazy. So Don't Nod made a deal, and Square Enix now owns Liz, and is free to do with it as they please. This doesn't sound fair, and it really isn't, but that's just the reality of publishing for small teams. And this isn't meant as a criticism on Square, by the way. They took a risk with Liz where no one else would, and now they're simply reaping the payout of that bet. Regardless of how you feel about the company in the grand scheme of things, can't blame them for pursuing a high return on investment on this one. How about the different developer? Well, you see, Don't Nod is in fact busy developing 2 to 3 other games right now, including Season 2 of Liz. Ain't nobody got time for no prequel over there, and they've made their stance clear on the subject, a stance that I've always agreed with, and in my eyes shows they respect their own creative integrity. Season 1 is complete and over. They had no plans to revisit it outside of possible brief cameos in their future seasons. In fact, it was Deck 9 that pitched the idea for the prequel to Square Enix. Allegedly, of course, that is simply something that they claim, and I have no reason to doubt it. And apparently it was so good that they got the gig. Don't Nod only acted as a consultant for Before the Storm. The extent of their involvement has not been disclosed, but by all accounts it has been rather minimal. It's the different voice cast that raises the most questions. You may or may not be aware that the reason for the change is the strike currently ongoing by the American Union of Voice Actors. Ashley Burch, Chloe's original voice actress, publicly stated it to be the reason she couldn't return. And yet the prequel got made anyway, resorting to non-union talent. Depending on your politics, this will either make you sharpen them pitchforks ready to skewer those damn scabs, or perhaps it will make you smirk at yet another failure of unionized labor. Or maybe you don't give a crap either way. The thing is, the issue is more complicated than a scumbag company or picket line crossing. You see, Square Enix is not a target of the strike. Neither is Deck 9. Both of these companies are above board in this regard and would cut a deal to work with the union. The problem lies with Blindlight, the large voice production company through which Square Enix might or might not be contractually obligated to do its voice talent casting for Life is Strange. Blindlight is being targeted by the strike, so to be hired by Square Enix for this role would have been to work for Blindlight, which constitutes crossing the picket line. Or at least that's what I read in the article linked below. I don't have first-hand accounts or anything. And so Chloe went from this...
Booyah, you skank. Karma's a bitch. Nice framing, too.
...to this.
You do realize I hate your boyfriend with every fiber of my being, right?
And Principal Wells went from this...
But we have to go over what happened before Miss Marsh... before she did what she did.
to this.
Perhaps you will find me less amusing if I mention the various allegations I've been hearing about your drug use.
And David went from this.
Do you have any more drugs? Drugs. Give me all your drugs.
Well, you get the idea. It sounds like such a gross, terrible cash grab, a prequel developed by a different studio with entirely different voice talent. But in truth, there is no real scumbaggery going on, I don't think, with the possible exception of a far less than ideal DLC business model. But that's a topic for another day. In fact, Before the Storm is a very, very sincere effort, sincere to a fault, developed by die-hard fans of the original with no other goal than to make a great experience for certain fans to love. It's just a set of unfortunate circumstances. You could argue that they simply should have delayed the game till the strike issue got resolved, but that's just not realistic. What if it takes another year or longer? What does Deck 9 do in the interim? And the release window needs to land between Season 1 and 2 for obvious reasons, right? If Before the Storm is going to exist, it needs to be now. You could then argue that Before the Storm didn't need to exist at all, and it shouldn't have been made in the first place. That a prequel to Season 1 is a disservice to the story, an extraneous weight that doesn't belong. And, well, then you and I would agree, because I'm not a fan of prequels in general, or this prequel in particular. Nothing personal, fellas at Deck 9, I know you're trying your best, but I'm a great proponent of mystery as an ingredient in a story, leaving certain aspects to the imagination. Sometimes the parts that you let the reader or player imagine are just as important as what you spell out. At least so far, the story of 16-year-old Chloe meeting Rachel Amber did not need to be spelled out. I'm giving you all this context and prequel talk because I could not shake it at any point while playing this game. Nearly every minute I spent back in Arcadia Bay was pervaded with the sense of pointlessness that comes with already knowing exactly where these characters are going to end up. Still though, I was very much open to be won over by sheer quality when I started. If your story is good enough, knowing how it all ends doesn't matter that much. And I was even excited about choosing every option to be as self-destructive as possible, just to see how far it would go and maybe make a compilation for the channel. I failed on purpose every backtalk sequence and generally behaved as badly as I could to everyone. But I got disillusioned about it halfway through. The option to be self-destructive or plain nasty wasn't even there half the time, and when it was oh so tame. Either completely toothless or coming off as a Tumblr edgelord trying too hard. Even if the story can't take any actual risks with the characters by its very own nature, considering the protagonist, I still expected a wider range of options on how to deal with people. So no, Before the Storm did not win me over with sheer quality. After my first play session of an hour or so, getting through the first 2 scenes and the journal entries, I walked into my wife's porn dungeon and told her, "The writing in this game is as subtle as a punch to the dick and a dump on your chest." This is the actual quote, I'm not making it up, which is serendipitous because I hadn't run into this line yet.
I want to punch that stupid man cow in the dick.
I can just imagine a number of sentences sounding off in the meetings hammering out these scenes and journal entries. Sentences like, "We need more pathetic pining for Max and make it sure there is a lot of innuendo." Or no, every single line must be edgy teenage angst. Or nah, that's far too subtle. We need to make sure there is no doubt. How about a rainbow middle finger candle? I don't want to come off like I'm vicious here. Take this as affectionate roasting, because the game was made by people that actually cared, and I appreciate the enthusiasm, if not the execution. But you see, the folks at Deck 9 have a narrative to get across and an angle to push, and they are not subtle about it. Chloe has exactly 2 personality traits. One, she's a teenager full of angst and pain, and every line must reflect this. 2, she might have dated a boy or 2, but she's as gay as they come now, and that needs to be a statement in every damn scene. The latter had me muttering, "Yeah, I get it," far more often than anyone should. And the former makes playing through the first episode insufferable at most times.
Should fill this with gasoline just in case David's car ever catches on fire.
The worst scenes bring to the forefront a sad truth about this prequel, what I feel is the fatal flaw, not only in the dialogue, but in the entire premise. There is no depth to the chosen protagonist. There is nothing new of substance to discover. Chloe is exactly what we know her to be at this age, an angsty, asshole teenager with a serious abandonment problem. The fact that the writing will punch you right in the dick every single time doesn't help matters. Why they didn't focus on a playable Rachel Amber is completely beyond me. There could have been a strong supernatural aspect with her, new and unexplored. She's as close as it gets to a blank slate, allowing for much more creative freedom and player agency in shaping her choices and beliefs. We would have experienced more variety than snarky comment number 554 when looking at our surroundings. We could have had a self-propelled plot instead of once more getting involved in someone else's problems. We could have explored an entirely unknown side of Arcania Bay and its mythology. The name of the franchise is Life is Strange, but there is nothing strange going on in Before the Storm until the very end of the episode. Compare that to Season 1, where the supernatural powers and themes are front and center. At least, personally speaking, they did most of the heavy lifting drawing me in back then, especially in the first episode, where the writing was at its cringiest and the emotional investment was yet to be built. Here's an example of the blatant lack of nuance that isn't much of a spoiler. Max goes from shy and absent-minded and socially anxious to complete asshole, being shown to blow off and then coldly ignore Chloe's repeated attempts at staying in touch. Max is now a sort of boogeyman, a caricature of a terrible person that blatantly discarded her best friend during her time of grief. A better way to do this would have been to have Chloe be subtly unpleasant and difficult to deal with following the separation, giving Max an actual reason not to want to dwell in the past. Max is still being shitty, no question, but it would have made it slightly less than 100% one-sided. But of course that would have shown a hint of nuance, and Deck 9 doesn't roll that way. That's not to say that you won't enjoy this game. If the Steam reviews and Reddit posts are any indication, I'm in the small minority finding the first episode of Before the Storm only one step above terrible. And by the way, whenever this happens with a critically acclaimed game, I simply tell myself, well, I guess I just wasn't part of the target audience or something. But I wrote a ton of freaking Life is Strange fanfiction, and I mean well over 400 pages worth of angst, adventure, and gay, so I'm exactly the target audience for more Life is Strange, and yet I was terribly put off by it. I guess that's why I'm taking so many pains to explain why. It feels like I'm betraying the game somehow. It probably doesn't help that I played it coming right off Hellblade. It's a kindness to say that Before the Storm doesn't compare favorably, but of course that's an unfair comparison. It's not unfair though to compare it to Season 1, and it falls so short. So anyway, if you enjoyed Season 1, chances are you will enjoy Before the Storm, albeit a little bit less. If you didn't like Season 1, you will find Before the Storm laughably bad. As I've already established, I'm someone that loved the original, even when parts of it left me thinking, well, that was fucking terrible. Like the conversation on the beach in episode 5 with Max and Chloe shouting feelings at each other. The good bits more than made up for it. I could point at certain aspects of the game and say, oh, that's good. Oh, that's great. Oh, I love that. In Before the Storm, the good bits can't carry such a leaden weight. The worst offenders are dialogue and voice acting combined. I can't get into all that without heavy spoilers, so if you're interested in playing this, even after everything I'm saying, now's the time to turn back. Oh wow, the writing and voice acting. There's no scene in which I didn't wonder who writes that line and calls it good. There is no scene in which I didn't wonder, was that really the best take you had? So many of the lines are a person sitting in a booth with half-lidded eyes droning through the script.
Mom's hiding her gray hair to impress her boyfriend. Maybe gray hair's his kryptonite. Maybe I should dye my hair gray.
Bring my purse down with you, please.
Yeah, okay.
Chloe, is that a black eye?
No.
Insubordination. No wonder your mother's worried about you.
Oh, that's sweet.
You're hella mysterious, Chloe Price.
No, wait, let's go back. Let's do that one again. The player might not get it. This time, pause for a whole 2 seconds after spelling out hella, okay? We must nail that origin story down, perish the thought that it might happen organically in the years they spent together after this. Every single voice has been recast and some are better than others, but they are all worse than the originals. No exceptions. And it's not just the moment to moment. The plot itself, what little there is, doesn't precisely engage, and that's because there is no hook. Before the Storm episode 1 doesn't stand on its own as the beginning of a story. It simply assumes you come pre-hooked and makes no effort to draw you in with an intriguing plot. It's just a series of mundane things happening. Chloe goes to a concert. Chloe has a chance meeting with Rachel. Chloe deals with David. Chloe goes to school. Chloe skips school with Rachel. This is a 3-episode prequel, and yet the entirety of the first episode feels like a prequel to the actual story. The hook happens at the end when Rachel goes nuts and awakens her powers, presumably. By the way, I don't know if a literal dumpster fire is the right image to associate with your game. And the dynamic between the two is so jarring, in that it's so immediately intimate. This connection is so unearned by the narrative, it's a lazy shortcut at best. I mean, if they're meeting at 16, they have 3 years in canon to get attached to each other. Did you really have to play the love at first concert card? Did you really have to make the sexual tension so blatantly obvious from the very start? Would abandoned Broken Bird Chloe really spill her guts like this on the very first day? It's just lazy and rushed. I actually like the ending though. Not the wildfire surprise you get hammered over the head with so many fire references that you can see it coming a million miles away, but I did like how it came about with Rachel's banshee power thing happening. It was unexpected yet hinted at, with the previous conversation suggesting that she can convince anyone to do anything. It made me genuinely interested in where the story might go. If only you'd had something like that at the beginning of the damn episode. Oh wow, wait a minute. Was that a positive comment? Alright, let's point out all the things I liked, because there are some. The music is gorgeous, easily the highlight of Before the Storm, mostly put together by the band Daughter. Quite a favorite of mine, and the one thing I was hyped about. I only resented the fact that there wasn't more of it. There were several moments, especially when Chloe sits and ponders poorly written thoughts, where it felt like a tune should be playing in the background, but there were only ambient noises. Special mention goes to the kick-ass Pisshead song you can listen to if you ask the security guard for his demo. Apparently it's an original song by a band made up of Deck 9 developers. They got chops, I was into it. Speaking of, I loved how well they captured the situation. A guy offers to let you listen to his original music, and you listen politely while they watch your every micro expression, and you're like, oh yeah, that's good, It was awkward and cringy in the best way possible, as close to real life as it gets.
I mean, I didn't really get it.
Oh, yeah, it's weird or whatever, and we're still trying to find our sound.
The backtalk dialogues where you get limited time to pick the right answer, they were okay, but they were both trivial to get right and didn't go nearly as far as they could have with snappy dialogue. I was expecting Chloe to chew into people and destroy them, but most of the time her words didn't have enough bite to warrant the reaction they get.
Idiot. You're not used to a word that big, are you? Don't be scared.
I like the main menu screen and how it changes at the end. Both scenes are really cool. The intro splash after the concert scene was perfect. It truly captured that Life is Strange vibe, and it got my hopes up for a little while. Despite a change in engine from Unreal to Unity, aesthetically the game looks almost exactly the same, which is a good thing, and most places kept up the attention to detail, though I'd certainly note there's less of it. And Chloe's commentary isn't nearly as diverse or interesting as Max's was. She's just trying too hard all the time. I do wish they'd updated the barf tree texture though. I still can't believe this thing made it past QA in the original. The animations are also consistently more wonky and generic, but not by much. And the eddies of smoke when Chloe lights up, so iconic of Life is Strange, have become Unity smoke effect number 7 in this one. It's curious how the new one is more realistic, but the old one is far more fitting. I like leaving your choice of graffiti in places. That was neat all around. Also neat, the special versions of journal and text whenever you're in a dream sequence. In general, I liked the concept of unsent letters to Max as diary entries, and some were rather touching, though they often served as yet another example of the zero subtlety approach. Put your thoughts in me, really? At least you didn't write fingers, I wouldn't have let that pass you. And you're telling Max of thinking about Pris when rubbing one out? Come on, have some goddamn restraint, Deck 9. Despite its merits, the entire Chloe journal thing feels like a contrivance. I mean, it suited Max's personality to a T to write all this stuff, and it's believable that Chloe would have written these letters some time ago, but would she really stop on writing a journal at this point in her life? I very much doubt they'd have implemented something like this if Season 1 hadn't done it first. It was like they had to have their own version. Speaking of stopping on writing, I like the idea of Chloe writing her objectives on her hand. It's very endearing, but it gets so dumb when she keeps magically updating it with the most menial of tasks. The objectives are so trivial in this game that they should have just played this for laughs, or used it for characterization instead, having Chloe write something that matters to her. But hey, I got a chuckle here. Victoria's texts were pretty funny. And this was a pretty okay joke.
Spare some change?
Sorry, we might have some leftover food when we're done.
What? No, I'm not. What kind of food?
And this was funny.
I want to punch that stupid man cow in the dick.
Like, right in the dick?
Right in the dick.
Though it immediately overplayed its hand by calling too much attention to it.
Chloe, you punch a lot of dicks.
So?
Cause that's another big problem. The writing constantly overplays its hand, calling too much attention to things, blatantly throwing details at your face instead of letting you notice, dwelling in the same issues over and over, laughing raucously at its own lame-ass cringe-fest comedy when only a tepid chuckle was warranted.
Why do we always hold hands like this? Didn't you tell me you were ambidextrous?
No, I didn't. I said I was ambisexual.
Oh, so you can have sex with both of your hands?
Exactly. Wanna see?
Only if you let go of my hand first.
By the way, why in the world did they cast two actresses that sound so damn similar? They have the same type of voice. Anytime you can't see who's speaking, it's not always 100% certain who said what.
Think this guy's married to a nutritionist? He's all like,
I'm not allowed to eat this stuff at home, so... I love grease! How can something that tastes so good be so wrong?
Uh-oh, dropped a fry on my suit.
Now I'll have to burn it.
Good thing I have a giant squirrel costume in the car. This is fun. Who's next?
I mean, there is a difference between the two, but it shouldn't be even remotely hard to tell your two main characters apart. Oh, jeez. I was listing positives and it turned into a bunch of backhanded compliments, didn't it? I can't help it. There's so much that's worse than it should. For example, we already know that the choices are not going to affect anything important, and nothing hammers it home like when Rachel lists one by one the decisions you've made, obviously going down the checklist of zeros and ones you've set.
Remember that biker asshole who wouldn't let you into the mill? You didn't give a shit. I saw you sneak through the side door.
You saw that?
And those skeevy douchebags who followed you upstairs? You dropped that one guy with a knee to the balls.
Only because you showed up at the last minute, and...
What about Drew? When he was picking on Nathan? You got right in his face and called him out.
And almost got punched in the head.
These are not consequences to your actions. This is just somebody rattling them off in the most stilted way possible. Even the other, quote, big choices, like what you do with the money at the concert, even if they change a significant part of the coming 2 episodes somehow, they're not going to have a permanent impact of any kind. And you could argue, well, neither did the choices in Season 1, right? Everything gets erased or killed at the end. But the overarching purpose of those choices was to shape Max as a person. Chloe is already set in stone. Don't get me wrong, I don't need player choice to enjoy a game, but this particular game promises meaningful choices and a story shaped by them. It needs to deliver on its own premise. There are several instances where a line for Chloe's thoughts is uttered where none was needed, such as here, compared with and without.
Let's explore.
You have fun, Chloe. I'm gonna go sit down.
Rachel's been acting kind of standoffish ever since we left the park. What's her deal?
An awesome pile of trash. Let's explore.
You have fun, Chloe. I'm gonna go sit down.
This is what I'm talking about with all this blathering of zero subtlety. I can see her thoughts on her face. It's obvious what's going on. You don't need to spell it out, and especially don't spell it out with a line so poorly put together and delivered. Rachel has been standoffish since she made a stank face at the guy that was obviously her father. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the Smash the Trash scene, where Chloe picks up the bat and goes to town. I was beginning to be moved by it, only for it to collapse immediately the moment that I was free to move around and dictate the pacing. This is one of those situations where the director should be fully in control for best emotional impact. And not just that, but this whole scene would have been far better served by being fully physical. No dialogue needed to spell out the already obvious symbolism. Here's what I mean. That's just my half-assed attempt to explain using what's already in the game. It could have been great if it had been done with this direction from scratch. Man, there's just so many more things, so many details, like, she just gave you that nail file, it wasn't yours. Why are you throwing it away? And where did it go now? What in the fuck is this walk? Are you auditioning for Jessica Rabbit? And where the hell did Victoria go? She just vanished. What is this supposed to be? Did I get unlucky or does this happen to everyone? You can leave this guy hanging for hours. It's so dumb. Either freeze time or put a timer on this. So many decision points ruined by this. What is this lighting effect on the fountain? Have you ever in your life been around this kind of bricks? They wouldn't reflect light like this in a million years. What is this pose? Are you about to do push-ups? Or are you inviting me to put something in your butt? And that's exactly where the shirt went, I suppose. You know, there is a real good reason Max carried a messenger bag by design. It's a shame. Donut would have given Chloe a rad backpack. Speaking of bags,
Mom's purse is pretty heavy.
if you didn't bother to attach the purse model to the character carrying it, maybe don't call attention to it.
Guys,
The hell is this? A mime contest? Was it that hard to record some lines for these two? This is in the opening of the game. Way to lower my expectations right away. What is this? Did you really just sniff me, motherfucker? Seriously, what is this creep move? Aren't you the goddamn principal? What are you doing?
Do I have to initiate a search of your person in order to establish the veracity of these allegations, Miss Price?
You don't sound smart enough. Want to put some more syllables in your words? You must have gone to Cornell. Do you have a toothache, lady? You've done that move 5 times now. And you might want to work on your posture. You're gonna end up like one of those Andromeda NPCs. The pieces don't even fit the grid! Get with the 25mm standard, you filthy casuals! What in the name of fuck is this look? That moment when you've been waiting 3 hours for your date to show up? Why are the tear streaks so weird? Why are there 2 streaks from each eye every single time? Tears don't work like that, it's so distracting. And what is this?
I don't always drink beer. But when I do, I prefer drinking it next to an old toilet.
How is that the line you settled on? What kind of weak-ass fail bump was that? No wonder Rachel didn't give a shit.
Are you kidding me?
Ugh, I can keep going for so long. There are so many things in only 3 hours of game. But I've made my point clear enough, I think. I do wonder how much my bias going in affected how strongly I felt about the flaws in this thing. Because I am biased, I won't pretend I wasn't terribly skeptical of this entire project. Would I have found it far more enjoyable if I'd gone in with that context? If this were the very first Life is Strange game I ever played and I weren't comparing it constantly to the Donut standard?
Well, shit. I always thought I was a good liar.
Good thing you're pretty.
I probably wouldn't have been so harsh, and I wouldn't have noticed so many problems. But just listen to that conversation, the poorly constructed sentences, the nasal voice, the dead silences while the game fetches the next line, the completely unwarranted face-to-face intimacy that's like they just got done boning. You've been in speaking terms for like 2 hours, you can't be there yet. I know, look, we better get this foreshadowing done on the very first day because we haven't already forced enough references to what's going to happen.
Don't be surprised, Chloe, if one day I'm just out of here.
The problems are there. I've shown them to you. They're real. No amount of hype could have blinded me to them. To close this off, I'll circle back to the idea of Rachel Amber being the playable character. Because you see, now we've seen Rachel having some kind of power, right? The problem with that is, those powers can only become a plot point if Chloe witnesses them. And if Chloe finds out that Rachel had powers, there is no way that she wouldn't have mentioned it to Max in Season 1, the moment that time manipulation conversation happened. Which clearly means Chloe won't become aware of Rachel's abilities, which means the one interesting thing about this story so far will not get fleshed out at all. Unless the game changes perspectives midway, or they pull some extremely lame amnesia trick on Chloe later on, or the powers are an equally lame fake-out to only seem supernatural. Imagine if Rachel had been the protagonist instead. The seeds for a different story are all there already. Imagine an opening with Rachel walking through a forest, and with each step, everything catches fire around her. She arrives at a clearing where she meets with a silent animal spirit of your choice. Imagine the flames closing in, and just as they lick her flesh, she wakes up. She wakes up next to her one-night stand in a bed that's not her own, hair all over the place and hangover pounding her head. Drinking gives her the weirdest dreams. Quietly, she tries to leave, maybe after searching for all her stuff and looking at the things in the room, but before she can go, Stephanie wakes up and calls her out. Here is where you get to use your silver tongue superpowers to convince her of whatever you want her to believe, each with its own consequence later on. Life is Strange Firewalk will follow Rachel as she navigates her perfect life, a life that's far from perfect under the surface, with the main plot being a game of cat and mouse against her father's mysterious mistress, who turns out to be a rival spirit walker that sees her as a threat, and she eventually traps Rachel and Chloe in a wildfire, possibly the climax of the game. We still get to know Chloe at this age, through Rachel's eyes this time. We get to decide exactly how she feels about Chloe because, unlike Chloe's feelings, Rachel's are not set in canon. So the choices will actually shape the character. They've seen each other around campus, but maybe their first conversation happens in a far seedier environment through their mutual connection of Frank, their dealer, with Chloe mocking her for not being so perfect after all. After Rachel tries to use her powers to manipulate her, Chloe isn't fazed. She says something like, "Go fuck yourself, princess," at which point Rachel realizes her powers don't work on this girl, which drives her to get closer and find out why, leading to their maybe sincere friendship or courtship. It would be all in your hands where it belongs. But before the storm it is. I am curious to see where they'll take this despite it all. That ending was genuinely intriguing, so yeah, I'm somehow looking forward to the next episode. Just consider my expectations buried under Rachel Amber's corpse. You do remember that's what's going to happen, right?